so that we can keep to our agenda. Are we ready? A couple of minutes. Don't worry, we're going to put your microphone on now. We can't wait to hear from you. Jenny Anderson from the UK. And, well, it's time to copy what's been going on in the UK. She's going to talk to us about these principles that we need to keep in mind when we're developing and promoting our city, Santa Cruz de Tenerife. Jenny Anderson, please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? That's working? Okay. Good morning. Gracias por invitarme a formar parte de este encuentro de personas que moran hacia un futuro nuevo y diferente. Tengo muchas ganas de explorar su ciudad en los próximos días. And that's the end of my Spanish, I'm afraid, because I had to read that. My Spanish is very, very poor. So I apologize that I'm not going to be able to deliver this talk to you in Spanish. I'm really happy to be here. Even driving from the airport yesterday, you can get a feel that this is a really interesting city to be part of. And I was very, very surprised by how green the journey was, which is an interesting indication of what extreme weather conditions here are doing, because normally I wouldn't expect the drive from the airport to here to look that green. So that was really interesting. So I've been invited today to talk to you a little bit about the key principles that we believe underlie how we might design regenerative futures. But first, if I may, I want to alliterate to something that is really serious for all of us, which is why those principles are enormously important. So I would say that we are in a really critical moment for our human species, in almost a once in a 500-year moment, where we have to make a completely different leap into the future and adopt a different way of thinking about how we relate to life on this planet that we have been gifted, and how we relate to each other, and how we relate to the natural systems that support life on Earth. It's as an important leap as when we first invented agriculture, designed the wheel, but it is a leap of consciousness in how we are going to relate to each other and to the future. We are in what is diversely described as a polycrisis or a metacrisis. That is a crisis of all of the systems that support life on Earth. And first and primarily, it is an ecological crisis, which is well expressed in the Stockholm Resilience Centre's planetary boundaries, where we can see in a very short space of time, from 2009 when they were first mapped, to most recently, that we have exceeded the limits for stable climate. That was interesting. For stable soil, for stable water that can support life on Earth. It is critical that we find strategic ways to rein in those excesses, whilst at the same time dealing with an economic and cultural crisis. This was something published by The Economist not so long ago that looked at how uninhabitable vast tracts across the equator might become if temperatures rise only 2.5 or 2 to 2.5 degrees, and we are coming closer and closer to those thresholds. That inhabitation alone will drive mass migration. Many societies think migration is a current challenge, but if we reach these kinds of temperatures, half of the Earth will become uninhabitable. So we have to deal with the ecological crisis. But at the same time, I think probably we all sense that we have a crisis of culture and we have a crisis of economy. The economic model, the global economic model on which we have relied for almost all of us most of our lives, which is centered on constant economic growth, is no longer working for us. If, I'm not sure about your health systems here, but certainly in the UK where I live, our health support systems are no longer working. Our risk profiles in almost every economic and cultural and social system that we look at, whether it's human health, physical health, mental health, engagement with work, aging populations, insurance risks, are pushing us towards a greater and greater economic and social crisis. And that is without even considering the increasingly unstable geopolitical environment in which we're working or living, where we are going to likely see increasing resource wars proliferating around the planet. So we are in an incredibly unstable and uncertain time in which we need to make that leap into the future. But the good news is we have made many conscious, enormous leaps since humans moved from being hunter-gatherers to the globalists that we are today. So we are immensely capable of changing the way in which we view how we will design our economies, how we will exist culturally, and how we will repair our ecological challenges. And what I would like to try and share with you today is some stories around the key principles that we work with at Really Regenerative that have enabled some city contexts to start the move towards the future. So what does this journey look like? I'm standing right in front of the screen, so you might not be able to see it. It is a journey. If we think about where many of our economic and cultural systems have been, we could call them conventional practice. Sometimes we might call them one step better than breaking the law. We have an enormous amount of what we might call greenwashing going on, but we have arrived at largely working with sustainable and circular practices. We describe those in the regenerative field as a resting disorder. They are practices that are holding, whether they are looking at managing sea rise and flooding, they are practices that are aimed at ameliorating the risks that we currently have. There are some practices that we move towards regenerative futures that we might describe as restorative. So any work that is restoring nature, and we're sitting in one of those amazing examples. And Carlo, if you are around, we really like your office. We'd all quite like to work in an office like this. But it's also about restoring social justice. And that takes different forms in different places in the world. And then we are moving forwards to a reconciliatory future where we're talking about things like decolonization of thought practices. And for my country in particular, that's looking at reparation around the world for previous colonial harms. But to arrive at a regenerative future, that is where we are designing in harmony with the living systems principles that have guaranteed the conditions conducive to life for 3.8 billion years. So the journey for us is from the machine story that we have lived for the last 500 years, the generic, globalized, intensive, industrial, value extracting, problem solving, externalities ignored past to a regenerative future that is regionalized, place-based, adaptive, distributive, collaborative, fairly priced for all, and in partnerships with each other where equality and equity and community is once again valued. So how might we do that? My blipper is not working. So this is us. The way in which we work in three ways. We're capability builders for regenerative futures through our learning journeys. We're researchers and publishers, and we have consulting partnerships with places around the world, some of which I want to try to share with you in the short time that I have. And our goal is to work towards places for life, where we have holistic ecology, economy, and culture all working together towards an equitable future. So, some principles. The first principles are the clearest and simplest truths that we can arrive at in terms of how we design. And we believe that there are 7 core truths within living systems design, the first of which is life designs for wholes and not for parts. So we generically have been trained to think in parts. Councils, our municipalities, are divided into different parts. They have waste management, they have social care. Our hospitals are divided into parts. They have cancer care hospitals, cardiovascular care. Our education systems are divided into parts and set and designed competitively. But that's not how life designs. So if we think about a pristine rainforest, every organism in that pristine rainforest interacts with another organism. Every organism has a clear role of contributing to the ongoing conditions conducive to life in that complex whole. Now, cities are vastly complex adaptive systems. And there is no city that I can point to today that I would describe as a regenerative city. But there are many of them that are on their way to being. So what does whole look like in the context of a city? So here's what we hope and we work towards, which is what we call healing the story of separation, the story of designing by parts. And that means healing the story between humans and nature, on that side, healing the story between humans and humans, where we have learned to label and to separate through racism, through everyday sexism, through every ism that we can think of. This journey towards regenerative futures is part of healing those stories. And it's also about recognizing that our scientific and analytical capabilities that we have developed so hard are valuable, but equally valuable are different ways of instinctive and intuitive knowing. So what does whole look like in terms of a city? This is the city of Kalundborg in Denmark. Is anybody familiar with this city? It's a very interesting small city in the center of Denmark. It's one of its very, very deep ports. And we were working with the city of Kalundborg between 2022 and 2025 on an EU project within the new European Bauhaus program. You can probably see from this picture that the city itself is divided into significantly different parts. There is a residential part of the city. There's a, is that me making that clack? Ah, what's this? Okay, is that better? Is it my dangly doobry doing it? Can I have an extra minute while I remember? Okay. So just behind me to the left here, you can see a refinery and an industrial plant. So Kalundborg had one of the first radio stations in Denmark. It had one of the first refineries. It had one of the first wind farms. It's now looking at hydrological energy. But it also has something which is really interesting called the symbiosis, which is here, and an educational park which is growing here. So the part of the project that we were involved with was the arrival of the Royal Danish Architecture School that was bringing a school to the educational park that has grown from the symbiosis. The symbiosis is one of the first fully circular industrial complexes in Europe, where every piece of waste of every organization is used by another. It's the home of Novozymes that produces 45% of the enzymes that are used in Europe. It is home of Novo Nordisk, which produces 60% of the insulin that is used in Europe. but every single organisation uses the waste products of the other. And you would think in such a city, that is a very technologically advanced city. But when we first came to Kalundborg, the team that was going to work with the municipality, with the Royal Danish Architecture School, first journeyed through our learning journey, Power of Place, to understand regenerative principles and map the historical, geological, economic, cultural stories of this place. And we saw a critical pattern that had repeated over thousands of years of incoming organizations, incoming kings, incoming different Viking tribes that had always arrived in Kalundborg and extracted value and wealth from it and given nothing back to it. And when we brought multi-stakeholder groups together to talk about the future of Kalundborg, unsurprisingly, we could see the same pattern playing out, where the industrial symbiosis, which is world-renowned, was unregarded in Denmark itself, and everybody who worked in it came from Copenhagen every day and left again. There was no interaction with the residents of that city. And the residents of the city described themselves as abandoned. They had absolutely no connection to nature. There wasn't a tree or a blade of grass in the city anywhere, despite the fact that it was surrounded by beautiful ocean and beautiful landscapes outside of the city. And there was hidden economic disparity. And even at the seafront, where they had developed a beautiful ocean front right opposite the refinery, nobody went there. There was no life there. So we started a process of bringing multi-stakeholder groups together with citizens to discuss the future of how we might heal the story of separation. And we made the arrival of the Royal Danish Architecture School critical as part of doing that. Instead of building a shiny new building, which the municipality wanted in the new campus, we said, how can we reintegrate this arrival into the city to create new value for the people that live there, culturally, economically, and ecologically. So the first arriving students worked with an arising citizen group that called themselves the Phoenix Citizen Group to reimagine parts of the city that were undervalued, underutilized, and empty. And instead of building the shiny new school, we created adaptive use programs of empty buildings like the one that you see behind me, which was at the station. And we housed all of the students in family homes instead of building a new complex for them to live in. Now, these things might sound very simple to do, but the effect of bringing in also an architectural company to reimagine what the city would look like if it was green, what it would look like if the vibrant seafront was populated with cafes and culture and bars. What happened is suddenly the industrial complex got interested in the city. Suddenly they put their hands in their pockets and started to invest in the well-being of the city. So over a 2 to 3 year period, the project called Desire, what does an irresistible circular society, rather than an industrial complex, look like? We started a process of reconnection between citizens, industrial complex, and municipality that is changing the way that the city operates. It's a small start, but that is what we mean by a whole approach. We looked at Kalundborg as a whole and asked the question, how can the arrival of the Royal Danish Architecture School heal the story of separation here? What does that look like on the other side of the world in New Zealand? In the city of Auckland, there is a project called the Mangere Ngahere project, which is a collaboration again between the municipality and the Maori people who live there. My country is largely responsible for an awful lot of colonial practice where indigenous peoples over long periods of time were disenfranchised from their land and their rights. But in New Zealand, almost all municipal projects now, because of the Treaty of Waitangi, have to consider the rights and the future potential of indigenous peoples. And indigenous peoples, the Maori in particularly, are prone to challenges with food and nutrition, and poor health because of food nutrition and food affordability. So this project is about cultural, ecological, and landscape restoration all the way through the center of the city to create multiple different food forests that the community decide where they will be, what will be planted, how the food will be harvested, how it will be shared, to create not just civic pride, but increase availability of low-cost, high-nutrition density food. So syntropic agroforestry, which was first developed in South America, has been used throughout the city to not just create the syntropic food forests, but also to create cultural healing and economic equity. You can see from the map behind me that the part of Auckland, Manangere, where most of Maori communities live, also had the lowest tree density and therefore the highest amount of heat islands. So this is a different approach to wholeness, which is about healing cultural harms, but also about healing health and at the same time bringing ecological improvement together. And this is one of the core tenets of regenerative design, is how can we, in whatever we do in our cities and wherever we do it, try for the holy grail of economic regeneration, cultural regeneration, and ecological restoration. And the final part of this project, which I think was really important, was that across New Zealand there are important spiritual heritage sites that belong to the Maori people, and these were protected and integrated and restored during the process of the Manangere project, which is ongoing. So because we describe regenerative work as living the questions rather than looking for certainty and answers, in each of these points I have some questions for you to go away and think about. So where here in Santa Cruz de Tenerife is the story of separation playing out? And how could you, your organization, participate in healing that story to help create more regenerative futures? So principle number 2, some of these principles may be opaque to you and hard to grasp, is life designs for evolutionary potential. We love problem solving. Problem solving attracts funding, it attracts kudos, but life doesn't actually problem solve. It creates constantly evolutionary potential. It looks forwards into the future. So when we're working with cities, we ask the same question. What is the evolutionary potential here? How can we move forwards? So in the UK is a city called Sheffield, which was an industrial city, had a huge steel industry, which has been over many decades now declining. But it's a really good example of how ecosystems of regeneration can come together. There is no overriding directive force in the city of Sheffield that is moving towards regeneration, but it has happened in an ecosystemic way. So we would describe that as the beginnings of something called urban bioregionalism. So there are physical and natural projects. A huge project that citizens have come together and created through an organization called Opus, which is about restoring the vitality of the River Don, which was one of the most polluted rivers in Britain that ran through the city. There is a lakeland reservation system that is being built in the Peak District to deal with water scarcity in the future. But there is an enormous amount of flood management work that needs to be done in the lower valleys. There are 5 rivers that flow through this city. And there is a local authority-run Rivers Trust that is looking after several of those rivers' health. So there are diverse projects, both citizen-led and authority-led ecological restoration projects. But there are also civic and cultural ecosystems in that city, led by the organization Opus, where they are bringing people together on a regular basis to talk about issues of the future, to debate them, to discuss them, and to find ways forward. They are a publishing organisation, so there are places that you can go and read and understand and learn about how regeneration in Sheffield could happen. They have created an innovation lab network of civic and social innovation programs in the city. And they have a thriving impact social enterprise network that is now looking at being ready to move from that form of governance to a new form of governance, to move from being social enterprises and impact-led organizations into regenerative organizations. That's another part of the ecosystem that is coming together. There's also a legal and governance group of organizations that are popping up. Lawyers for Nature has a very strong arm based there, which is arguing successfully for rivers that run through the city to be given rights of nature as a movement applied to the River Don. And finally, the institutions, 2 big universities there, and universities are created in a different paradigm, are finally coming to the party and also being prepared to invest in the future. And the final frontier that is being tested there, which is always the hardest system to work with, is new financial models. Have any of you heard about bioregional financing facilities as a way of moving towards the future? It's very, very new and only being tested in a handful of locations in the US and Europe. Sheffield is one of those. So it is trying to prototype a facility that is flow funding to ecological, economic, and cultural restoration and regeneration projects, so that all of these small grassroots growing projects have long-term funding and stability for the future. It will be also the site of testing the first UK bioregional bank. And they're also testing multivalent currency prototypes. So one of the things that when I was at university, we used to play games, how to change the world. The one thing we never worked out how to do was how do we change the finance system. But I think bioregional financing facilities, if they develop well, may be core financial instruments for cities to become key nodes of bioregional regeneration. So that's Sheffield. Jersey is an island, like you, where we have been working. So when we ask what's the evolutionary potential of an island, not dissimilar to a city, Jersey is only 7 miles by 5. It's a very small island, but it is a tax haven. That is what it is known for, the management of large amounts of money. What it also didn't have 9 years ago was any food security at all. Most of the food produced there was industrially produced potato and dairy. And a colleague who came on our learning journey, Power of Place, who also happened to be a chef, returned from project working in India and wanted to set up a high-quality restaurant where people could experience good food, as we did, courtesy of Diego yesterday evening in town. And she couldn't get any ingredients. It was also apparent to her that this island has the highest diabetes record in the whole of Europe. So she set out to change the food system. And the way in which she changed the food system was by incremental stages, which is, again, how we design in terms of regenerative design. We look at future pathways that build on each other. So the first thing she did was set up a membership organization that gave space to the very few organic farmers to bring their produce to market and allowed the customers who were members to experience different types of organically produced menus. She brought chefs in from around the world to start to change the taste buds of the citizens of the island. That project was so successful, it attracted the attention of government. And they began to partner with government on future agricultural policy. And because the island is a crown dependency, it has a large amount of freedom in the laws it makes, and it was able in a very short space of time, hello butterfly, to change the investment policy so that organic and regenerative farmers could benefit from incoming investment rather than it going to industrial food producers. They then started a festival where they brought experts, like here, where you've brought speakers from all over Europe to talk about cities, to talk about food and the future of food, so that they could actually build more strategic credibility for the change in the food system. But what they were really eyeing up was changing the entire nature of the financial system on the island. So if we could prove that we could change the food and agricultural system, and on the third year festival we brought in the finance sector, what we are trying to work towards is a Jersey where its financial capability, which is unique to that island, is turned towards providing investment for regenerative transformation all across Europe. This takes time. It took 9 years to move the food system to where it is now, and we're only just starting to move forwards on change. But one of the key projects that emerged from the government was a partnership, for example, with Rwanda, where the Jersey dairy cow, which is a high-producing cow, was exported to Rwanda to many thousands of widows who were left without husbands, who are managing farms, to get them started on high-production, high-protein dairy produce to reinstate their farms. So it's starting to use finance and its capabilities to look outward and repair challenges in the outer world. And this is what the process looks like. It'd be very hard for you to see, but there have been 3 different interim stages. A first future state: can we get an organic, regenerative, food-based enterprise to work on the island? Can we then get commitment from the government to change its policies and invest? And can we then bring the finance sector in and continue to expand the potential of this island? So what is the unrealized evolutionary potential of Santa Cruz? And how could you and your organization participate in realizing your evolutionary potential is a question for you. So number 3. Life designs with respect for biocultural uniqueness. What does that mean? Biocultural uniqueness. It sounds like a really big phrase. But what it means is every single place in the world, and we always work from place, has unique qualities of ecology, of geology, of patterns of energy, of flows. And those places thrive the best when their economies and culture are based on those unique patterns. So what does that look like? This is a city in Thailand called Chantaburi. Has anyone ever been there? No? It's a really interesting city in the east of Thailand, which was first settled some 700-800 years ago by the Chong people who had moved in from the north and from Vietnam. And this whole province has had a pattern of different cultures moving into it over hundreds of years, so that it is a really strong melting pot. This is some of their original architecture on the river that runs through Chantaburi. It's called the Chantaboon Community, and it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But the challenge of this region, anyone who has ever been to Thailand, was the incoming Chinese yen. Chinese have a fierce love of this particular fruit. Has anyone ever eaten it? Okay. It's really painfully smelly and horrible. It's not my taste, but the Chinese love it. And the power of their investment, they have changed the landscape of food production around the city of Chantaburi and in the Chantaburi region to be monoculture durian production. So an economy that was very varied over the centuries, that produced a lot of spices, had huge heritage in cardamom and pepper, had jewelry enterprise, was a very, very diverse rubber producing, is gradually moving towards economic monoculture. That is crashing biodiversity because this plant requires a lot of chemicals to keep it pest-free. So what was a biodiversity hotspot started to plummet over the last 10 years. And when we were invited in, we did our normal process, which is a story of place process, to understand what the future potential of this place could be. So we brought the economic part of the municipality, together with the tourism industry and with the farming and agroecology producing organisations, and had put together a plan over a 10-year period to increase the potential for biodynamic farming, organic farming and regenerative farming, to create learning journeys and courses for farmers and investment for farmers to be able to move back towards a more multiple production design rather than relying on durian alone, because that could change very quickly. And we began really with pepper and cardamom and started with a simple celebration, bringing together of the tourism, the economic and the agricultural community, and asked the tourism community, every single hotel, every single restaurant, however large, however small, to invest and support the multiple different types of agricultural production and the shift towards away from monoculture. It will take time. It's in its very early stages of change. And we are hoping that that will bring further investment into the restoration of the cultural artifacts in the Chong community along the river. So we're trying to move towards a more economic, thriving diversity there. So what is bioculturally unique about Santa Cruz de Tenerife that's not well expressed? And how could you enliven what is bioculturally unique here economically? We're sitting in a marvelous example of what can be done. Principle number 4, because I'm kind of watching my time here and hoping if I go over, the whole day goes over, so I mustn't. Life designs for relationality and nested interconnectedness. Another very big phrase that I hope the poor translators are managing well with. But what does it really mean in the context of cities? So this is a city in France, in the Camargue, in the south of France, called Arles. Has anyone ever been there? Yes, I see someone nodding. So this is an amazing project that has been designed to recognize the environment that Arles, the city of Arles, is nested in. And it's supported by a single philanthropist, the Meyer Hoffman Foundation, who made their fortunes in Roche Pharmaceuticals. And in the center of the city, in many ways much like this, but a different type of site, was a large derelict site that had been used for the design of railway engines. And she bought it, and over the last 12 to 13 years, it has been a center of experimentation of bio-based materials that are natural and indigenous to the region of the Camargue. Salt, sunflowers. How can these naturally existing materials be used to regenerate and redesign and restore an entire complex? And in the middle of which they invited Frank Gehry, a world-famous architect that my friends from Bilbao will be very familiar with, because they also have one of his designs in the center of the city. Built the Frank Gehry Tower in the center, but over this period of time, they have invited many different ateliers of scientists, of PhD students, to experiment with a vast array of different materials for the built environment. And in doing so, they have created an entirely new economic supply chain for the built environment with expertise that they are now taking to different cities around the world to look at what are the bio-based materials that you have in this region, and how can you create a biomaterials-based economy that is bioculturally unique to your place. Here you can see some of the scientists experimenting with salt, and some of the building renovations that have been done using sunflower residue, using salt, using different types of minerals that are found that are natural to the region of the Camargue. And it's a marvelous example of what we describe as a center for life. It has been designed with the future in mind, the transition of an entire industry, the built environment, but also has served the cultural regeneration of the city, the economic prosperity of the city, and is now extending that knowledge out to other areas. So that is what we describe as an example of nested relational design. I hope that makes sense. This is a project which is the only not city project that I want to refer to, but it is an important one. It's in Pembrokeshire in Wales, and it's supported by WWF, who also came on our learning journey. And again, a river runs through this region, highly polluted by industrial food production, industrial dairy and industrial chicken farming. But the important thing about this particular story is the recognition of the organization that has been a conservation organization all its life. Finally understanding that if you do not address economic prospects of the people that live in a region and the cultural vitality, and all you do is keep banging on about how important conservation is, you alienate the people that live there. And you must address the economic and cultural regeneration at the same time. So that means bringing in innovative finance to help farmers transition out of industrial dairy farming and industrial chicken farming and into something new. It means creating an innovation ecosystem where you experiment with seaweed production as fertilizer instead of chemical fertilizer. It means bringing the universities in to support that kind of experiment, and it means bringing the community with you so that they have an active role and an active part in that transition. And that is, I think, it's called the Wholescape Project, but it's an important example, again, of how to bring those different strands together in a program that is about transformative futures. So again, what systems in Santa Cruz need regeneration? What would your version of WWF Wholescape be here? So principle number 5, life works through fields of energy. Again, it might sound slightly obscure to understand. So let me give you a story again from the other side of the world, from the city of Melbourne. And it is illustrative of the importance of being able to respond to shocks. So in 2019, Australia suffered some of the worst wildfires it had ever seen, which was closely followed by the COVID pandemic. And Melbourne had one of the longest and most serious shutdowns during lockdown. But what the city did, led by an organisation which grew out of a first experiment by WWF Australia, was grow an enterprise called Regen Melbourne. It brought all of the stakeholders of the city together in an inquiry about the future and said, when we come out of this, what do we want Melbourne to be about? What are the most important values that we want to embody, that we want to grow in our city, that we want to be representative of who we are in the future? It then worked with Kate Raworth's donut economics model to put a more detailed layer on the program of change that would have to take place after the end of the COVID pandemic. And created something called the Melbourne Donut, where it looked at how it would change social systems, how it would restore natural systems, and what the economic and governance redesign of the city might have to be. And in its third stage, its third iteration, it has now moved to 3 core challenges that those 2 study processes have identified, all of which are systemic initiatives. Swimmable Birrarung, which is the river that runs through Melbourne, is to actually make a river swimmable, you have to deal with everything upstream. All of the pollution that is going into it from source to sea. But it's a cultural initiative. People want to be able to swim in the river that runs through their city. So you are creating a field of energy that is then prepared, because of that mission and that goal, to work on the challenges of cleaning up the industry, plastics, metals, that it's further upstream, and again made the river impossible to swim in. There are other initiatives around the world that are about drinkable rivers. Paris during the Olympics, I don't know that it got to a drinkable quality. I'm still not sure I'd like a cupful of Seine, but these are initiatives that galvanize multiple different groups behind a single idea. They're also going for a project called 300 Streets. 300 Streets is about making every single street in Melbourne shady, safe for children to play in, with a strong and resilient community. And the final project is 15-minute cornucopias drawn from Collis's 15-minute city, is that there should be community food production within 15 minutes of where everybody lives, bringing food production back into the city rather than from the outlying regions. It's a really important and probably one of the most strongest regenerative projects in a city that has been pulled together by a single organisation, unlike Sheffield that I spoke about before, which is still in the stage of bringing the different ecosystems together. Regen Melbourne has been the central organising entity that has brought this project into being. There are a number of different regenerative fields around the world that are emerging that you may know: biomimicry, donor economics, dark matters lab, wellbeing economy, bioregional weaving labs. This is a natural process that evolution is driven by. So what fields of energy are here, and how could your organisation support and grow them? Finally, life evolves at critical nodes. This is a really useful one to work with. One of my great mentors was Jaime Lerner, who used to be mayor of Curitiba in Brazil, and he taught me a lot about urban acupuncture, and I've learned a lot since about systems acupuncture. He transformed the city of Curitiba through a series of different urban acupuncture strategies, one of which that has been replicated around the world, where a mobility system transformed the lives of people and the economy of the city, the rapid bus transport system. In Seoul, for example, rescuing a river that had been buried under a 6-lane flyover of concrete for many years created a transformation of neighborhoods, of traffic flow, air quality, biodiversity across the city of Seoul. A huge infrastructure project, made a difference to many different systems in the city. You can also transform a city by working with the presence of genius. This is the Frank Gehry designed Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, which was part of the last transformation that the city of Bilbao, which is now working on the next stage of transformation that you'll hear of, and you are familiar with what the potential of a transformative building can do as part of a connected systemic strategy. I'm going to skip over this one because I only have a minute to go. Cities can be nodes in urban bioregions. That is an important way that we are starting to think about the roles of cities in the future. It's very emergent and it's very early. There are a couple of examples that you can see on screen. Barichara in Colombia, where there are 7 different foundations that are being put together to bring finance into ecological, economic restoration, all entirely led by citizens. That is trying to be a prototype for a small town as the key hub in a bioregional, the health of a bioregion. That is expanding across the US in a tour and coming to Europe at the end of this year, working with us in different parts of Europe. This is another one from New Zealand, the Otkaro River Corridor in Christchurch. That is a river restoration program that happened again in the wake of the earthquake shocks of Christchurch, where the municipality came together with the Maori indigenous communities to create from source to sea ecological corridor where how to rebuild over many hundreds of thousands of houses that were lost could be done ecologically, sustainably, and in partnership with the local community. Here's one of the types of constructions that was built during that program. So what are the critical nodes in culture, economy, and ecology in Santa Cruz? And finally, life is evolutionary and developmental, which is a very critical key living system principle that runs through everything that we do, is nothing stands still. Life always evolves. So there are a number of very small projects, of which we are one type of organization, that is helping this kind of design take place. This is the simplest and best way I can explain our regenerative design approach. We work on changing human economic systems. We work on changing human cultural systems so that they align with living systems principles over time. We regenerate the life support systems that we need. But there are two critical features that have to wrap around all of that transformative change. The first is there must be a regenerative innovation culture and innovation ecosystems built in each place that work with the biocultural uniqueness of place, as I spoke to about Arles, and they need wrapping around with the culture and learning that can adopt and embody these principles, always looking towards the future, always being evolutionary, looking for evolutionary potential, not problem solving, celebrating the biocultural uniqueness of place, designing with nested relationality, Santa Cruz to Tenerife, Tenerife to the Canary Islands is nested in the coastal line of Africa. How do those things come together? This is what we have tested for the last 10 years, and we have found to work. And I'm going to stop there because I've gone over my time, and somebody's going to drag me off the stage in a minute. But thank you very much for listening and for your time, and I'm looking forward to meeting, hopefully, some of you who are joining our workshop later today. Thank you very much.